So in Sydney, this is where the two of them sort of get together. So in Sydney, John opened a hole-in-the-wall deli in the Town Hall Railway Station underpass. There he met another European immigrant, Frank Lowy, who delivered small goods to him. The two went into business together, opening a delicatessen and coffee shop in the Western Sydney suburb of Blacktown in 1954. I have big question marks. How? How many immigrants came here and they wouldn't get such a fabulous break as that within 2 years to be able to get a delicatessen and coffee shop together from selling small goods. Yeah? By the end of the decade, by the end of the 50s, they'd moved into a property development and built their first shopping mall, Westfield Place, also in Blacktown, 1959. Big question marks. Got to question these things. How did they get the money for that? How did they get the money for developing property development? Because you've got to lay it out first. That's incredible. So this was the first Westfield Centre. So it's been, of course, as you know, the heart of retail innovation and development since Frank Lowy and John formed the partnership in the 50s. So they were both Holocaust survivors. They arrived in Australia with next to nothing and built an empire. Smelly to me, very, very smelly. Anyway, we're going to leave that behind now and go into the institute that Lowy has created, because everybody's had been to a Westfield that has all the stock standard shops. So it's actually only, it doesn't offer diversity at all. It offers only what they allow in, you know. Okay, so the Lowy Institute is what he created in 2003. And of course, he's a leading businessman. So in 2002, as the 50th anniversary of my arrival in Australia approached, I began to consider what philanthropic gesture I might make to a country in return for a half-century of opportunity that Australia had given me. Inspired by the tradition so well established in America of individuals establishing think tanks to generate and disseminate public policy proposals. Mind going off here? Public policy proposals. My family and I settled on the idea of supporting the creation of an international policy institute in Australia. Okay, he's a man in place. He is a man put in place. And this is actually what the institute's about. You can just go Google, DuckDuckGo, this information. It's all open source. On the website, this is what it says. Lowy Institute is an Australian think tank with global outlook. Should go in WO outlook. Our research interests are as broad as Australia's interests, and we host distinguished speakers from around the globe on foreign policy, defence, politics, aid and development, journalism, sport, science and the arts. As an Australian think tank, Asia touches everything that Lowy Institute does. Our research and events calendar have a special Asia-Pacific focus, and our experts produce commentary for the world's leading news outlets on events in the region. Okay, keep that one in mind. So the Lowy Institute is at the centre of Australia's foreign policy and national security debates. Now this is important. It's right there in front of us if we go and have a look. Every Prime Minister and Foreign Minister since 2003, when the Institute was founded, has spoken at the Lowy Institute. Our annual poll of Australian public opinion is cited around the world. Our experts are sought out by the Australian media for commentary on breaking events. It's very true. This is all about the moulding and all of their research, including our flagship Lowy Institute papers published by Penguin, help set the national agenda. Oh my gosh. These are the members. So you usually pay a bit of money to be a member. So I'd say that these guys get all their policies, etc., and ideas of what they're going to do from this institute. So here we've got the Australian Federal Police, we've got AMP, the big insurance guys, ANZ, the bank. We've got Austrade. We've got the Attorney General's Department. We've got Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, Department of Home Affairs, Department of Defence, Office of National Assessments, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Good old Aussie super. Boeing, BHP, Cbus, another super, I'm pretty sure. And look at that, CC Amatel, Combank. Okay, Commonwealth Bank is a private bank now. JB, I don't know what that is. And we've got King and Wood Mallisons. Magellan, experts in global investing. Marsh, NAB, New South Wales, Premier and Cabinet. Now, this is very important, Reserve Bank of Australia. Reserve Bank of Australia is not a privately owned bank. It is not our bank. Then we've got Rio Tinto, which was the Queen, Lizzie's. And the next one's important, Rothschilds, okay? Red Shields. Saab, Centre Group, that's actually the Westfield, an offshoot of the Westfield group. State Government of Victoria. Australian Government Treasury, UBS, which is a European bank, I think, Swiss bank, and Westpac. So the sponsors and partners, because you've always got to follow the money. So the sponsors and partners, they do a lecture and dinner. BHP, Capital Group, Rio Tinto, and Rothschilds & Co. does an international fellowship. Isn't that lovely? Grant funders. Australian Government, the Lowy Institute's Engaging Asia project was established with the financial support of the Australian Government. The Australian Government also funds the Pacific Islands Aid Mapping Program, the Pacific Research Program and the AusPNG Network through Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Australia's Security and the Rules-Based Order Project through the Department of Defence. Okay, so there's a lot of money getting over there. So, Frankie Lowy. Let's have a look at what he's done. He created the whole Westfield Corporation with John, but he went on to be more successful. I think John pulled out many years before. I think he passed much earlier. So I never knew this. But Lowy was director of the Reserve Bank of Australia in 1995. He also has the Centre Group. He has the Lowy Institute 2003. He's also got a Cancer Research Centre. And he's a member of the Brookings Institution International Advisory Council in Washington. Brookings Institute is massive, massive. Have a look into it. It's a think tank over there. Okay, and then we've got the Institute for National Security Studies, Israel Research Institute and think tank affiliated with Tel Aviv University, dealing in areas of national security matters such as military and strategic affairs, terrorism and low-intensity conflict, military balance in the Middle East, and cyber warfare. Okay, he's involved in Israel this whole time. See, our politicians aren't allowed to have dual citizenship. They have to be totally Aussies. And this is how they do it. And also Lowe was chairman of the Football Federation of Australia. And if anybody remembers, he was caught with trying to bribe FIFA, the international body, to get it the World Cup in Australia. Now, he obviously did a lot of work for the Queen and the whole establishment, which also means the Red Shields, because he was knighted. He's a Sir. It's crazy. And this was really interesting part of my little bit of research. And it was just out of the bridge from 2015. Frank Lowy is one of the Zionist capitalists you may have heard less about. He tends not to be raised in the press and media in order to pursue his own commercial and political affairs comfortably. So basically he stays in the shadows. This one will blow your socks off if you haven't heard this one before. So Lowy made huge profits in the 9/11 attacks, because he was co-partner with Larry Silverstein, himself very close to Benjamin Netanyahu, and they had rented the whole World Trade Center for 99 years, just a few weeks before 9/11 attacks. The World Trade Center complex buildings 1, 2 and 7, along with Westfield Hotel, were ruined in the 9/11 attacks. So Silverstein and the Westfield Company pocketed about $5.4 billion from the attacks, because they had massive, massive insurance policies. So remember too that Lowy had military training. Anyway, let's look at this. These are the really interesting theory too, because, wow, so many of the Westfield buildings all over the world have been subjected to terrorist attacks. You can pause and have a look, but we're just going to move on. All over the world. So these guys are not exactly squeaky. The sale of Westfield to the French property firm draws to a close, and this was back in 2017. They sold it all for $32 billion. But this one in 2019 is that, so Frank Lowy makes a liar, don't know how to say it, Holocaust survivor who fought as part of the Haganah paramilitary group in 1948, sells real estate empire and returns to Israel. Very interesting. And the Lowy Institute continues because his 3 sons are involved in the running of that and all sorts of things. And I would suggest you do go and have a look because of the people who are on the board. We've got Gonski and I think it's Houston. A couple of different people. Go and have a look. It's interesting. Okay. Now here's just a couple of pickies. He was only knighted in, 20, just, within the last decade. But here he is as quite a young man, and he's standing very, very close to Queenie. Very close. And there he is next to Mr. Bill. And look who else. Look at the man there. Yep. And of course he's there next to the other big czar. I would call them the Australia's royalty in a way because, gee, they've had a yellow brick road, haven't they? Pretty amazing. All right, I really need for you to understand too that when they mention the Jewish people and that they're Jewish, we really, really need to look at this. This is a very controversial book because it was published into English at the beginning of very early, I think 1901 or something like that. And of course it was denied as being anything of truth. As far as I know, it has been validated by the people who did Fall of the Cabal. And they're saying that it was written by a Jesuit for the flow-on of as a MO for modus operandi for ushering in the NWO. But this is really important because this is their operations manual. So because I'm just going to go through a couple of the protocols and I'm just going to read them to you because this one, number 7, is all about the press and the public opinion. And I've just snipped a bit out of it. And you can get this freely if you go and you DuckDuckGo and find it. And this one just says, we must compel the governments of the Goyim. What a Goyim? Everything it's Gentiles, everybody other except just Jewish. But it's not if you're talking about Zionists. That's a completely different thing. That's it's a political body. It is not to do with religion at all. So, but they have used the Jewish people as a shield and they've operated behind them. So I'm going to start again. We must compel the governments of the Goyim to take action in the direction favoured by our widely conceived plan, already approaching the desired consummation by what we shall represent as public opinion, secretly prompted by us through the means of that so-called great power, the press, which with a few exceptions that may be disregarded, is already entirely in our hands. So that tells you that they had their people in place owning all of the press of what was important before the turn of the 19th century. Yeah? Back in the 1800s. That's just incredible. It's a really good admission. Really good admission to me. They've owned it for ages. Then if we go to the next, the Protocol 9, it's all about, and you really need to look at this, Masonic watchword, meaning of the anti-Semitism, etc., terror, who are the servants of Masonry, and it goes on, because I'm just going to read this for you. In order not to annihilate the institutions of the Goyim before it is time, we have touched them with craft and delicacy, and have taken hold of the ends of the springs which move their mechanism. These springs lay in a strict but just sense of order. We have replaced them by a chaotic license of liberalism. We have got our hands into the administration of the law, into the conduct of elections, into the press, into liberty of the person, but principally into the education and training as being the cornerstones of a free existence. Everything we have known has been a lie. Intentionally. Protocol 12. Just reading on. So what is progress is understood by Masonry. More about the press, Masonic solidarity, but we're just going to do quite a bit of reading here. We turn to the periodical press, because this is how they do it. It's incredible. We shall impose on it, as on all printed matter, stamp taxes per sheet and deposits of caution money, and books of less than 30 sheets will pay double. We shall reckon them as pamphlets in order, on the one hand, to reduce the number of magazines, which are the worst form of printed poison, and on the other, in order that this measure may force writers into such lengthy productions that they will be little read, especially as they will be costly. At the same time, what we shall publish ourselves to influence mental development in the direction laid down for our profit will be cheap and will be read voraciously. Total manipulation, isn't it? Total intent. The tax will bring vapid literary ambitions within bounds, and the liability to penalties will make literary men dependent upon us. Oh my God. And if there should be any found who are desirous of writing against us, they will not find any person eager to print their productions. Before accepting any production for publication in print, the publisher or printer will have to apply to the authorities for permission to do so. Thus we shall know beforehand all tricks preparing against us, and shall nullify them by getting ahead with explanations on the subject treated of. That is, forcing behaviour, forcing everything. Well, that's just not good enough for us anymore, is it? And it goes on. Literature and journalism are two of the most important educative forces, and therefore our government will become proprietor of the majority of the journals. This will neutralise the injurious influence of the privately owned press, and will put us in possession of a tremendous influence upon the public mind. If we give permits for 10 journals, we shall ourselves found 30, and so on in the same proportion. This, however, must in no wise be suspected by the public, for which reason all journals published by us will be the most opposite in appearance, tendencies and opinions, thereby creating confidence in us and bringing over to us our quite unsuspicious opponents, who will thus fall into the trap and be rendered harmless. So there's a massive, massive trick going on, because they set themselves up as front establishments with an ethic that would be for the people. They get in all of the journalists, and then for them to get their pay, they have to trap them, swing them around. It's just incredible. Who thinks like this? It's quite amazing. And the establishment that organises this in Australia is actually on the second to last moment before this finishes today. So in the front rank will stand organs of an official character. They will always stand guard over our interests, and therefore their influence will be comparatively insignificant. So they're a hidden body, okay, and that's the body of people who organise everything for them, which we don't even know who they are, do we? You tell me one. So the second rank will be the semi-official organs, whose part it will be to attract the tepid and indifferent. In the third rank, we shall set up our own, to all appearances, opposition, which, in at least one of its organs, will present what looks like the very antipodes, upside downers, to us. Our real opponents at heart will accept this simulated opposition as their own and will show us their cards. All our newspapers will be of all possible complexions, aristocratic, republican, revolutionary, even anarchical. And that applies to us. For so long, of course, as the Constitution exists, like the Indian idol Vishnu, they will have 100 hands, and every one of them will have a finger on any one of the public opinions as required. When a pulse quickens, these hands will lead opinion in the direction of our aims. It is intentional. Now, I probably would have read this 20 years ago. And you don't have to. You read it once and you can see what they do. It is a game plan. So here in Australia, let's come here. Now, another thing with the Mockingbird media is a term that we use called 4am talking points. Now, 4am talking points, how does this happen? Well, of course, it's through the wire service. It gets delivered. It gets delivered in to all news services that subscribe to it. So as you heard, the Lowy Institute also puts out media that suits the agenda. And we've also got this institution called the AAP, the Australian Associated Press. And what it says right here will tell you what it is. It's Australia's national news agency delivering a continuous stream of breaking news, information and photographs direct to subscribers. Media companies have trusted AAP Newswire content for more than 8 decades. Yep, you've got it right there, 80 years. Our news service sets the standard. Did you hear that? Sets the standard for accuracy, reliability, relevance and impartiality, and I'd have to add, agenda. With an international network of journalists, photographers and producers, AAP Newswire covers all the significant stories which shape the daily news agenda across national and international news, politics, sports and finance. Okay, trusted, accurate and impartial. Look who started it. This gentleman here, Sir Keith Arthur Murdoch. He was born in Melbourne, Aussie, in 1885 and passed as early as 1952, a really long time ago. Now, he started out in Melbourne at the Age. A family friend got him into the Age called David Syme. Now, his character that you might want to have a look at too. Then he saved some money up and he went off to London. Went off over there to the London School of Economics. Now, I used to rub shoulders. Now, the London School of Economics, did you remember that? That was actually in that chart I showed you earlier. Yeah. Okay. So he also used to be good friends with Prime Ministers, Alfred Deakin. Yeah. He also worked at the Age as a parliamentary reporter. He was also rubbing shoulders with Prime Minister Andrew Fisher. And he was the political correspondent for the Sydney Sun. So he was a journo, this journalist guy. So when he was over there in England, he was the editor for the London Cable Service. Or actually, when he returned, he was the editor of the London Cable Service in Melbourne for the Sun and for the Melbourne Herald in 1915. So he also went to New Zealand with Prime Minister Andrew Fisher for war talks with New Zealand Prime Minister William Massey. Okay, and it was all about just before all the Anzacs went to Gallipoli, and he didn't come directly back to Australia. He went off on this great big tour over to Egypt, talking to this person, talking to that person, and anyway, he ended up in London. And he was working side by side with Lord Northcliffe. Now, do you remember he was mentioned in the book earlier as well? Part of the think tank, the London think tank. Now, here's the proprietor of The Times London, the Daily Mirror, and other British newspapers. And in that time, Mr. Murdoch became great mates with Billy Hughes, the Prime Minister. And this is how the story goes. So Murdoch remained in London, expanding the cable service, writing influential journalism and helping his friend Billy Hughes on visits to England, until he was offered the post of chief editor at the Melbourne Herald, which he took in January 1921. Arranging for the paper's general manager to be demoted, he began applying Lord Northcliffe's principles, with frequent advice from Northcliffe himself. As he had in London, he focused on political controversy, but he also made the Herald influential in other ways, through such devices as improved arts coverage. Remember, that was part of the agenda, was to get the arts and celebrity thing going. When the proprietor of the Sydney Sun tried to break into the Melbourne market with the Sun News pictorial in 1922, Murdoch fought a long campaign which eventually resulted in the Herald, its own circulation up by 50%, taking over the new tabloid in 1925. Pac-Man gobbling up. Yep, he acquired the nickname Lord Southcliffe, from Northcliffe to Southcliffe, and in 1928 became managing director of the company, by which time the Sun was on its way to becoming Australia's highest selling newspaper. So this chap here, what a lovely one. That little boy on sitting there is Rupert Murdoch, just a little baby. Now, they're quite a mysterious family because we haven't really heard about them, except for the mama there. We have heard of her, but we'll just get to her later on. So these are the kiddies. So they got married in 1927, and that's Elizabeth Joy Green. They had kiddies, Helen, later became Mrs. Jeff Hanbury. Good old Rupert sitting up there. Look at them, they look miserable. And then Anne is Mrs. Milan Cantor, and Janet, who's now Mrs. John Calvert-Jones. And they're all grown up. There's a lot more to this family than what we've been led to believe. So from 1926 onward, Keith Murdoch led a campaign to take over newspapers elsewhere in Australia with varying success. And by 1935, the Herald was involved with 11 radio stations. So this is the Tsar of media being born here. He also led a merger of rival cable services to form AAP in 1935. This one is for all of us environmental people that are concerned, but they have this power to do these things. So he built a paper mill in Tasmania capable of processing native trees, which began in 1938. So here we go, the AAP employs 80 journos, it's got bureaus all over Australia, it's also got correspondents in New Zealand and London. It uses a network of contributors from the US, Europe, Asia and Africa. And I'd say it gets fed by Reuters, etc. AAP's domestic news coverage is complemented by alliances with the major international news agencies. So that is how they control it. It's distributed by some global network, eh? So in June 1940, Murdoch was appointed to a newly created Australian government post, Director General of Information. Let's think Bernays. Let's think Goebbels. And on the 18th of July in 1940, he obtained authorisation to compel all news media to publish government statements as and when necessary. Comparisons were made with Goebbels, of course, as mentioned. Press cooperation was swiftly withdrawn. Politicians protested, and despite agreements to modify the regulation, in November he was obliged to resign the post. They moved a little bit too quickly, but got to admit, but by now they've really taken it over. They did well. So Murdoch died way back in 1952, but his family was still left with full control of News Limited. So it was already established, eh?